What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Adventure Outpost, your hub for all things movie related. Another weekend has come and gone. It is once again time to talk those juicy box office numbers. All eyes were on the second weekend of Guardians to see what its week-to-week drop-off is going to be. Was it going to fall in line with a lot of the more terrible Marvel movies that have come out this past few years and had this just awful drop, or was it going to be able to buck the trend and hang around with the big boys? And it looked like we finally got our answer to that question. We're going to dive into all of that here today, but it was an absolutely stellar week here at the box office, especially as far as the MCU is concerned. They should be very happy this weekend as we run down now all of these movies that have dropped now in here for the top 10 for this past week, and we start to answer and ask our questions for the following week. But before we dive into all of that, as always, if you enjoyed these videos, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, drop some comments down below. Let me know what you went and saw this past weekend. And as always, we will kick it off with our 2023 box office chart monitor. This is where we take a look week over week at how well the box office is doing, what it's been able to hold over in its top 10, and how well we've been doing, how many $100 million weekends we've been able to have. So as always, we go to the chart. Here in our 19th week, we are actually at 95 million in the top 10 for this past weekend, down 39% from the previous weekend. So just missed out on that $100 million mark, but still a pretty solid weekend here, despite not much coming out. We only had the release of the Book Club Chapter 2 and then a few nothing movies that nobody had ever heard of until they came out. Fool's Paradise, Blackberry, Hypnotic, just random movies that dropped and did absolutely nothing here at the box office. So the fact that we still got to 95 million with the second week of Guardians and the Book Club Chapter 2 says that's a pretty solid weekend there overall. But now we turn our attention to the top 10 and we see just where all the dominoes fell this past weekend. Yes, that is a nice little Easter egg towards Hypnotic if you went and saw it this past weekend. I actually did go and see that movie. It was the only of these random ass movies that came out this weekend that managed to make it into the top 10. We will dive into it in there, see where it ended up. But my God, was that a movie. I don't know who had dirt on Ben Affleck, who's got pictures of him naked or whatever to force him into this movie. But dear God, man, he needs a better agent, or he really needs to start picking his projects. Because how could he have Air last month that he directed, an absolutely great biopic about Nike, and then churn out this nonsense in the next month? It just blows my mind. But anyway, let's dive into the top 10 and see just where all the dominoes fell this past weekend. And as we said before, Guardians of the Galaxy, of course, was going to hold on to the number one spot here in its second week. Drops only 48.9%. That is fan-fucking-tastic. That is a win that Marvel needed. They were having upwards of 60% drop-offs in its second week for all of its Phase 4 movies. Post-Endgame, outside of Spider-Man No Way Home, these movies have been struggling. And obviously, for some of them, you could look at the pandemic. You can't really account Black Widow, Shang-Chi, Eternals. Those are really in the thick of the pandemic that really struggled to do anything. But they still had these awful weekend drops. These second weekend drops were just terrible. And even as we got out of the pandemic, a lot of them still had them. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness had a really terrible one. Ant-Man had the worst one of all time. Spider-Man's was still high, but that's only because that movie made fucking every single dollar on the planet in its opening weekend. Its second week drop-off was going to be massive, but it still put up ridiculous numbers. So to finally get here at 48.9% drop, that is one of the lowest drops weekend to weekend for a Marvel movie of any phase, not just for Phase 4 and Phase 5 here. So this is huge. This is the absolute win that Marvel needed right now. Obviously, there are some factors in play here that it helped that there was nothing else coming out this weekend. That Book Club Chapter 2 was its only competition, if you could even really call it competition right now. That was mostly just counter programming, but that was the only wide release this weekend. So that really probably helped put some more asses back into the seats for Guardians this weekend than it normally would have, maybe if some other big movies were coming out. Like, it would have been interesting to see if Fast 10 was coming out in the second weekend of Guardians to see just what that drop-off would have been. But this is still an absolute win for Marvel. It definitely helps that the movie is really, really good. It helps that it had an A cinema score. It just helps that it had really good positive word of mouth. It goes to show that if you put out product that people want to see, the holdovers will be there. People will turn up. You just got to give people what they want. And that is putting talented people and letting them do what they do. Not making products that seem mass manufactured by a committee, like a lot of these Marvel movies have seemed lately. What really helped this movie is that it feels like a James Gunn movie. It doesn't feel like, obviously it's a Marvel movie, but it feels like a James Gunn movie that he would make under the Marvel banner, and not so much that Marvel made a Marvel movie that just happened to have James Gunn as the writer-director. So it's a very big distinction, because you didn't really get that with any of the other ones. You got little snippets in Doctor Strange where like you could tell that they let Sam Raimi play, but it never felt like a Sam Raimi movie in a Marvel movie. It felt like a Marvel movie that just let Sam Raimi write and direct it. It never felt like a Sam Raimi movie for the most part. And that's the thing you could say for most of these movies. They don't feel like the byproducts of the directors and writers making these movies. And that's why I think this one had a big, huge win here, is because you absolutely just let James Gunn be James Gunn and make the movies. The dude knows what he's doing. He knows what to do. And it's an absolute shame that they're losing him to DC now, because they should have given this dude the fucking world. And they didn't. And now he's gone, and he's going to DC, and he's going to wreck some shit over there because he's the fucking man, and he doesn't make a bad movie. So it's going to be very interesting to see what's going to happen in the next few years with James Gunn at the helm of DC. But still, 48.9%, big win by Marvel. They should be absolutely proud of that. Guardians of the Galaxy took in $60 million this past weekend to bring its total domestic haul to $213 million off a $250 million budget. Obviously, when we're getting down to it, this movie will end up turning a profit overall. The question now is, how high will this movie get? In its second weekend, it's already at $213 million. It needs $1 million more to already pass the domestic budget of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. So it's insane that after 2 weeks, Guardians is going to pass Ant-Man domestically, and I think it already passed it worldwide. So in 2 weeks, this movie has done more than the entirety of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. So that really needs and speaks volumes to the level of output of what the MCU is doing right now, and they really need to go back to the drawing board, look at what works from this movie, and start applying it to upcoming releases. In second place, the Super Mario Brothers in its sixth week drops only 29.9%. This movie and its fucking holdovers is absolutely astronomical. It takes in $13 million to bring its total domestic haul to $535 million off of a $100 million budget. Just stupid amounts of money. Book Club 2, the next chapter, debuts in the third spot. It takes in $6.5 million off a $20 million budget. So this movie not really putting up the counter programming that it was hoping for this weekend, especially with Mother's Day. So it looks like it's going to need a bit of legs if it wants to get past that $20 million budget. In fourth place, we've got Evil Dead Rise in its fourth week, dropping 36.6%. It takes in $3.7 million to bring its total domestic haul to $60 million off a $19 million budget. That is a big horror win for Warner Brothers. And rounding out the top five is Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, in its third week, drops 23%. That's a solid little holdover right there. It definitely probably helped from the Mother's Day release there. I know I took my mother and my future mother-in-law to go see this movie on Mother's Day. It took in $2.5 million to bring its total domestic haul to $16 million off a $30 million budget. So it doesn't look like this movie is going to quite reach its initial budget, which is a shame because it is a solid movie. It definitely deserves to have itself a bit of an audience there. Looking at the back five, in sixth place with the movie we were talking about before, Ben Affleck, Hypnotic. Just an absolute mindfuck of a movie, not only in plot, but also in what the fuck were they thinking. It took in $2.3 million for an absolute box office low performance for Ben Affleck at the box office, with a budget of $65 million. $65 million to make that movie. It's a 93-minute long movie about Ben Affleck learning that there are people out there that can say words and hypnotize people to do things, and he needs to find his daughter, and it turns out one of the hypnotic people took his daughter. This movie cost $65 million to make. In seventh place is John Wick Chapter 4 in its eighth week, still hanging around in the top 10. That is a record that we're going to be taking a look at later for 2023. It dropped only 17.8%, 8 weeks in. Fucking phenomenal. $1.9 million to take its total domestic haul to $182 million off of a $100 million budget. Fucking fantastic. In eighth place, we've got Love Again in its second week, dropping 34.9%, takes in $1.5 million to bring its total domestic haul to $5 million off of a $9 million budget. So it doesn't look like it's even going to make that $9 million budget back. In ninth place, Ben Affleck again here, baby. Air in its sixth week drops 44.8%. Took in $768,000 to bring its total domestic haul to $51 million off of a $90 million budget. And rounding out the top 10, perhaps its final performance in the top 10 here, is Dungeons & Dragons Honor Amongst Thieves. In its seventh week, drops 49.4%. Takes in $741,000 to bring its total domestic haul to $92 million off of a $150 million budget. Now, as always, we like to take a look at our fallen heroes. These are our heroes that did their time in the top 10 10 but have bowed out for greener passages. We have 2 movies this week that have bowed out of the top 10. We take a look at them now. After 2 weeks on the chart, Sisu bows out, and after 3 weeks on the chart, Guy Ritchie's The Covenant bows out. You guys did your time, you had your say, you made your money, but now it's time to bow out for greener passages. We will see you in the world of physical media, and as always, we salute you. Now we turn our attention back over to the Super Mario Brothers movie. We are charting along with its worldwide grosses and its domestic grosses to see just how high up these charts it's going to go for its all-time grosses. We look here at the worldwide grosses first. Not as big as a jump as last weekend. When we looked at it last weekend, it jumped from like number 48 to 25. It jumped up so quickly. This week, it only jumped up 1 spot. We take a look here now at the chart. It's now in the 24th spot, just passing Minions. We talked last week, we said as we were making this video, it probably passed Minions. It did that, but it still didn't have enough to pass over Iron Man. So it looks like this movie is finally starting to slow down, at least in the worldwide grossing is concerned. It may end up probably getting up a few more spots, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 spots maybe, but I don't see it really getting, I said maybe it was going to top out at 1.5, but I think that might have been an overestimate. I think now it's looking at maybe 1.3. This movie seems to finally starting to slow down, and especially now with a lot of summer titles coming out week over week now, we don't have another week where nothing comes out until like August. So it is about to be balls to the walls for the next few weeks with all these movies coming out. So Super Mario Brothers sits now comfortably in the 24th spot with $1.210 billion, just behind the 23rd spot, which is Iron Man 3 at $1.214 billion. I think it'll finally get enough to pass Iron Man, but how much more it has after that remains to be seen. I think it looks like we're going to see it settle somewhere in the low 20s, at least where the worldwide grosses are concerned. We turn our attention over to the domestic grossers, however, and it had a little bit more of a jump off. It jumped up into the 15th spot from, I believe, the 18th spot. It was sitting pretty behind Rogue One last week when we talked about it. It is now jumped up ahead of The Dark Knight. It sits in the 15th spot with $535 million domestically. It sits right behind The Lion King from 2019 with $543 million. Does it have another $9-10 million in it to pass that one? It's possible. I guess it depends on what its legs are going to be the next few weeks with all these other big movies coming out. So I think this movie might end up either settling here in the 15th spot or possibly making it to the 14th spot. But I do not think it's passing the 13th spot. Incredibles 2 with $608 million. I don't think it has enough left in it to get over to that. I wouldn't put it past this movie, just like we've seen with some other movies. When the demand is there and when the legs are there, these movies break records. And it doesn't matter what you think it's going to do or not going to do. It will do it sometimes. We saw it before with Avatar, that if the movie is there and the people want to see it, the movie just keeps doing business. And Super Mario Brothers seems to be one of those movies that just keeps doing business. So I could easily see this movie passing or getting up to Incredibles 2. It wouldn't be the most shocking thing to happen. I don't expect it to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. I think this movie is going to top at just under $600 million domestically, I think, when all is said and done. But I don't think it's going to pass The Incredibles 2. But still, an absolutely stellar performance from this movie that just showed up, broke all sorts of records, and cemented itself as one of the biggest animated movies of all time. We turn our attention now to the top 10 worldwide and domestic for the year of 2023. We start with our top 10 worldwide, as always. In the first spot, obviously, we've got the Super Mario Brothers of $1.2 billion. Full River Red with $673 million. The Wandering Earth 2 with $604 million. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in its second week manages to jump up to the 4th spot with $528 million. So 2 weekends and it's already at $500 million. So that is very impressive for this movie. It's going to be interesting to see what it will do next weekend and what its legs are going to be. If is it going to be the second movie of 2023 that will be able to hit $1 billion? None of the Guardians movies have hit $1 billion yet. Will this be the one to be able to buck the trend? It remains to be seen. But 2 weeks in, $500 million of worldwide is very impressive. And now in 5th place, couldn't even make $500 million. And we talk about the highs right now of Guardians. We drop to the lows of the MCU right now with Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and the 5th spot with $475 million. I'm sure that's only going to drop further and further as the year goes on. In 6th spot, we got John Wick Chapter 4 with $418 million, Creed 3 with $273 million, Boonie Bears with $221 million, Dungeons and Dragons in the 9th spot with $203 million, and Megan rounding out the top 10 with $176 million. Over on the domestic front, the Super Mario Brothers movie hanging in first place with $535 million. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania still holds on to second place here with $214 million, but right behind it, probably as the time we're filming this video, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 will pass it, but it sits in third place right now with $213 million. John Wick Chapter 4 right behind it with $182 million. Creed 3 with $156 million. Scream 6 with $108 million. Megan with $95 million. Dungeons and Dragons with $90 million. Cocaine Bear in the ninth spot with $64 million. And jumping into the top 10, a movie I didn't think would even show up in the domestic 2023 here, but here it is. Evil Dead Rise jumps into the top 10 spot in the 10th seed right now with $60 million, knocking out the box office bomb Shazam: Fury of the Gods. So dear God, Shazam just getting fucking owned, knocked out of there. Evil Dead Rise in the 10th spot now. It's fucking absolute shake up right there. That is always incredible to see. I love when you get these wild dark horses coming out of nowhere. Enjoy it while you can, Evil Dead Rise, because I don't think you'll be spending a lot of time here in the top 10, but hey, any week you could spend in the top 10 domestically or worldwide is an absolute win in and of itself. Now, with the number one opening of Guardians last week and retaining the number one spot in the second week, we finally get to go to that chart that I love to look at so much, and that is the movies that are able to hold on to number one consecutively week over week and see just which movie had the best legs, held the number one spot for the longest. We take a look here at the chart, and obviously, Avatar is the big winner here, as we've talked about ad nauseum for the past few months. It was an absolute fucking just destroyer. So that's always going to sit in the number one. But then you got right now Guardians of the Galaxy joins the party. It held on to May 7th and May 12th. I don't know if it's going to get another week in there right now. It's going to look like it's going to do the classic MCU where it holds on to a week or two and then drops off because more stuff comes out. Fast X coming out this weekend. It's pretty much assumed that movie is going to take the number one spot. It would be wildly insane if Guardians held on to the number one spot. I just don't see it happening, especially with the absolute cultural demand and enjoyment of the Fast series. I don't know who is out there enjoying it, but they're out there. They keep making these movies number one. So I'm sure we're going to get Fast X number one this upcoming weekend. So Guardians looks like you're going to join Ant-Man and the Wasp, holding 2 weekends for 2023, but still better than so many other movies that don't hold consecutive weekends at all. And last but not least, we turn our attention to one of my favorite charts, and that is the 2023 Top 10 Chart Riders. These are our boys that have spent the most time in the top 10. We'd like to take a look and tally it up here so that at the end of the year we can take a look and see which movies for 2023 had the best legs at the box office. We take a look here now at this chart, and we got a lot of good shakeups in here, some huge stuff. As you can see at the bottom, we'll start all the way down there at the bottom. Cocaine Bear locked in at 5 weeks. Right there in the ninth spot, we got Scream 6, Creed 3, Jesus Revolution, Megan, and Missing, all locked in at 6 weeks. 6 weeks seems to be the median average of weeks that these movies spend in the top 10 before bowing out. Right now, just ahead of it, holding strong. If you could put up another week in the top 10, they're both in good standing here to be in some of the best for 2023. Air and the Super Mario Brothers movie both came out the same weekend, both at 6 weeks apiece in the top 10. Super Mario Brothers clearly going to get a 7th week. Air remains to be seen. It's holding on in the 9th spot this past weekend, so it's not looking good. This one might end up getting locked in at 6 weeks, but who knows? I think Fast X is the only big movie coming out this week, so if that is the case and that's the only movie that jumps into the top 10 and Dungeons and Dragons gets knocked out, Air might get a 7th week here, might jump ahead of the pack here, but that's going to be an interesting question to look forward to for next week. Will Air get to 7 weeks on this chart, or is it going to end up joining the average for so many movies at getting locked in at 6 weeks? Ant-Man and the Wasp right ahead of that is locked in at 7 weeks, but a movie that's actually looks like it might tie Ant-Man, something I didn't think was going to happen. Dungeons and Dragons right now, 7 weeks in the top 10. That's going to be another question for next week. Will it be able to hold into that 10th spot? Just eke its way into the top 10 against next week to also join an elite status of movies that have done 8 weeks. There hasn't been that many movies. So is Dungeons and Dragons going to be one of those that's going to jump up to there, or is it going to lock in at 7 weeks and join Ant-Man and the Wasp? That is another question to ask for next week. But now we have A Man Called Otto finally knocked out of the top 3. It is locked in 4th spot at 8 weeks. Locked in right now for a movie that jumped ahead of it that absolutely might join the ranks of these upper echelon movies. And that's John Wick Chapter 4 right now is at 8 weeks in the top 10. It's sitting pretty right now in the 7th spot. It's been pretty consistently in the top 10 week over week. It had an absolutely phenomenal holdover from last week to this week. So I think this movie is still going to hold in for at least maybe 2 to 3 more weeks. So it's possible that we're going to see John Wick Chapter 4 join Puss in Boots and Avatar as some of the biggest movies to be released this year in the box office. And right now, just ahead of it, it would be amazing to get John Wick up in there, because then we'd actually have a 2023 movie that is hanging around up there with the big boys, because our holdovers from 2022 did so fucking well that they are holding the 1-2 spot. They got a stranglehold on the 1 and 2 spot right now. Puss in Boots locked in at 11 weeks in the 2nd spot. Avatar: The Way of Water locked in at 12 weeks. Does John Wick have it in it to hang in for another 9, 10, 11, 12, another 4 weeks to hang in the top 10, to just tie Avatar? And then you have to do 5 weeks if it wants to take the number 1 seed. That's a tall order. Because, like I said, there's a lot of stuff coming out. Like, it is off to the races starting this weekend. We do not get a quiet weekend again until August. It is now about to be one of the craziest summer box offices that we've had probably since 2019. Like, you got Fast X this weekend, The Little Mermaid next weekend, Spider-Man the first weekend of June, then Transformers, then The Flash and Elemental, then the R-rated comedy No Hard Feelings, the Jennifer Lawrence movie, then Indiana Jones, then Insidious: The Red Door, then Mission Impossible, then Barbie and Oppenheimer. Like, it just doesn't fucking stop. A Haunted Mansion after that. I think the week after that is the Meg 2. Like, it just, until August, it is just going to be balls to the walls. So for any movie to hold in and have excellent legs this summer is going to have to really be fucking fantastic. It's really going to have to bring the goods and have an insane fucking just audience to get it in there, to hold it in there, to get anywhere close to what Avatar and Puss in Boots did at the beginning of this year. John Wick right now is probably our biggest hope, simply because of when it came out and how it's been able to have good legs. But 5 weeks it needs to put up. 5 more weeks in the top 10 it needs to put up to get there. I don't think it's going to do it. Because if you're looking, it's in the 7th spot right now. If it drops a spot with each new movie, it's done. It's absolutely done. It's out of there. Its only hope is that these smaller movies just drop off, so it just continuously keeps like hedging itself in the 5, 6, 7 spot. Because obviously it's in the 7th spot right now behind Hypnotic. Hypnotic's out next week. There's no way that movie's hanging around the top 10 again. So like John Wick could move up a spot for next weekend with Fast X. And then with the problem is there's so much nonsense movies coming out over Memorial Day weekend. Because like you got The Little Mermaid, but then you got all these nonsense fucking little movies like About My Father, the Sebastian Maniscalco comedy, the Machine comedy with the comedian Brett, I don't even know how to pronounce his last name. Like that's coming out. I think there's like another like really dumb, stupid thing coming out over Memorial. Like it's those little ones that are going to kill it. And I know I'm rambling now because we're just like, it's like, dude, what are you even talking about at this point? We get it. I know, but this is just interesting stuff that I like to think about. It's just stuff that I like to look at, and it's just super interesting to me. I just like it, all right? That's what you're here for. You're here because we like this nonsense. So it's going to be interesting to see what John Wick will be able to do. Is it going to be able to pass Puss in Boots? Maybe. That one's a good possibility. Passing Avatar, though, to be the number 1 chart rider for the year? I don't know. Going to be tough. It's possible that we could end this year with Avatar: The Way of Water being the biggest chart rider for 2023, despite coming out the previous year. That's fucking crazy. But that's what I love about the box office, man. It just does box office shit. But that'll do it for all of us here at the Outpost in this adventure. It was a stellar weekend at the box office. The summer box office is always a stellar time, and it's great to watch week over week and see just how crazy it's going to get. All eyes now turn to the questions we asked before, and then also what is Fast X going to do this weekend? How big is its opening going to be? What's it going to do here at the box office? Is it going to knock Guardians out of the number 1 spot? Probably. What's the holdover going to be for Guardians in its 3rd week when it's up against actual stiff competition? Going to be interesting to see. What's Super Mario Brothers going to be able to keep pulling in despite all these other movies coming out right now? Going to be interesting to see. Is John Wick going to be able to add some more weeks to it and get itself up there in the chart rider? Going to be interesting to see. There's a lot of good questions up ahead now that we're going to turn to look at for the next week. So be sure to check back here next weekend where we answer these questions and we look forward to the few further questions that are coming in the future, because the box office is always spinning an epic good tale of juicy, juicy box office numbers. But that'll do it for all of us here in this adventure. Until the next one, you have been you, I have been me. These are the movies that we love so much. And until next time, I'll see you at the movies.